I haven't had night Okay, so good afternoon. I'm Mika Cho. I'm the director of Silverman Gallery, and very proud of this exhibition. And we have a beautiful catalog, so we can talk about it later. But I am not going to say much. I just want to thank you, everybody. Thank you to my students working here, and thank you to Elias Document and Shana and Vicky from here. And more than anything, Mark, to share. Every time when I come to visit, it's like, I'm working. So anyway, so here they are, Mark and Shana.
Hi. Okay, amazing. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I've never been accused of you can't hear me when I talk. Believe me. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay. Good. Okay. I am not going to. Okay. I have known you for 1,000 years, far too long. We're both way too young to have been friends as long as we've been friends. And if there's one thing I know about you, it's that you are maybe the artist of all the artists that I know who's the best at explaining yourself and what you're up to and being clear. No, don't, this is what I meant. But just to say, like, a lot of artists, they go, it's more intuitive, or it's more like, I'm expressing, I'm gonna get it out, and then I'm gonna see what it means after that. Whereas you are one of the most intentional creators that I know. And so I, Shana Nys Dambrot, art critic in Los Angeles, and for those who don't know, am not, no. I just meant, oh my God, what if there's somebody here who's like, who's that girl? But we've been friends for so long that I feel like every conversation we have, whether there's an audience or not, just kind of picks up from the last one. And so I just want to say a couple of things, and then I think I, as well as everyone here, just really wants to hear from you, because there's so many things going on in this show, and just one of them is it being time for you to tell your own damn story. Thank you. And so I'm going to make room for that, right? And but I would like to say I'm so glad, because I think many of us, I certainly have seen some of these over the years, because there's work in here that was as old as 2018?
2018, yeah.
Old. But just to say, there have been, so many of us have seen some of what we saw where it started, maybe. Then COVID, everything was strange, but then on the other side of that, Bill Turner did an amazing show with you that got a lot of attention, and we saw many more of them there. And so, it's really nice to see, even though it's not every single one, because many live in lucky private collectors' homes and institutions, but that this does reach back to the beginning, so that there's an ability to see the entire evolution of this project. And as it has changed, the world has been changing around it. So it started out as being that moment plus history, and then that moment became the last 6 years. Oh my God. So I think a great place to start would be for you to just describe for everyone a little bit of that arc, like how it started and how it's going with this series, please. And I'll jump in if I want to pull on the thread, but I really just want to hear from you. I'm here for you, don't worry.
The series was more or less propelled by when I first heard that they were banning books. When I grew up, one of the things about books was that they were sacred. And I used to read this comic book. It was called Classics Illustrated. Some of you may remember that. And what it did was it kind of whet your appetite for reading the book itself. And so I was really introduced to the classics by that. And in our household, books were something that were sacred because they held a lot of information. And when I heard that they were talking about banning books, I thought it was one of the most disturbing things that I had heard in recent memory. And I realized that even though you can ban a book, it's a lot more difficult to ban an image. And so people that were hell-bent on kind of rewriting our history, it became important to me to make sure that that history would last. You know, so you can burn the book or do whatever you want to do, but once you see the image, that image is in your head, and the story that's associated with that image gets into your head too.
Yeah.
And I was raised as a Roman Catholic. I fell as soon as I reached the age of reason. But the thing about it, you know, I went to Catholic school. I was an altar boy. I learned the Mass in Latin and all the rest of that stuff. And, you know, we had Carmelite friars, and we had Sisters of St. Joseph, and the whole thing.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And, you know, the thing about it was that as much as I rebelled against the dogma, I really appreciated the ceremony and the ritual.
The aesthetic.
It was, the aesthetics of it were just, you know, beautiful, you know. And, you know, Sunday you'd sit up there and you'd do a high mass and you'd be getting high on the incense. And, you know, every so often you'd take a couple swigs of the altar wine and, you know, it was pretty good.
Yeah, lots of velvet, and candelabras and whatnot, No, and the architecture. And to your point, I mean, obviously it's a callback to what Classics Illustrated did for you, right? Start with the image, whet the appetite for the rest of the history. But it's also a callback to like why Catholic churches look the way they do, why the stained glass windows, why the paintings. Because we're talking about a time when Mass was read in Latin. So even if you were literate as a sort of lay person in the congregation, it probably wasn't in Latin. So there was a barrier, and there was not a lot of teaching everyone to read going on in the Middle Ages, for example. And so that partly helped sustain the authority of the priest as the only intermediary if you wanted to talk to God, because you couldn't even read what is it. You had to believe what he said the word was. All, you know, that I grew up in secular New York Jew, so I don't, everything I know about Roman Catholicism I know from the Renaissance sections of my art history education, but that's a lot because this stuff existed in order to convey the message to would-be believers in the total absence of them being able to read whatever text existed. And so for better or worse, that was also the strategy of that aesthetic that you responded to. So that makes sense like in a second parallel way. Yeah.
So the first iteration of the series actually was the Black Madonnas.
Yes.
And the Black Madonnas were disturbing to a lot of people because you're not supposed to take these images and portray them any other way other than how they were classically exposed. And so I was looking at the Madonnas by Da Vinci and by Bellini and Raphael and all those people. And you know, it just struck me, going back to an earlier conversation I had when I first got out of undergraduate, and I would take my work around to different galleries, and the gallerists would say, "We like your work, but it's so ethnic." Which I understood was code for black, which, you know, the subcode for that was not marketable. You know? And you know, the argument that I was having with them basically was, I just got finished with 4 years of schooling, and I sat up there and studied all these artists, and never once did their ethnicity really enter into what I was.
Well, it was assumed.
I'm sorry?
It was assumed.
Yeah,
right.
It was just assumed.
It was inherent, implicit, assumed. But what's so interesting is that this is also like those things are starting to be teased apart in more detail now in other aspects. You know, there's an entire discourse about Beethoven. There's not to like, I'm not likening it to like, you know, Bridgerton as like a pop culture joke, but just to say what made that possible is actual scholarship on the personal ancestry of Queen Anne. Like that wasn't cut out. I mean, the rest of it, we're not here to talk about, but just to say like, that was the foundation for that, is people now looking back and going, oh, wait, not to mention the fact that everyone in the Bible was, you know, North African, definitionally. Like, there are no white people in the Bible. Like, I'm so sorry, you know? And that's just something that's become more able to be discussed and more like readily available as knowledge in the world at the same time as as the Black Madonnas and everything that came after it coming out. So did you feel like you were like a lone voice in that way, or did you feel like you could see other artists and musicians and historians and whatever?
Well, I was wrestling with this contradiction because when I was in my earlier years, I lived in Europe, and we would go to a lot of churches throughout France and throughout Germany and stuff like that, and you would see the Madonna characterized in all kinds of different ways. And, one of the more intriguing was whenever you saw a Black Madonna. And,
which did exist, by the way.
They 500 of them in France.
That's what
alone.
I'm saying. So in the course of this, you also have brought to light a true historical fact that needs to be known, that's not really taught in art history, et cetera.
So years later, I had maintained some relationship with a few Catholics, a couple priests and stuff like that. And I asked him, what's this deal with the Black Madonna, And, he was really hard pressed to come up with a solid answer. And the church does not have an answer for why there is a Black Madonna. What they have said on many occasions was that because of all the soot that the candles threw up, it settled on these Madonnas and they turned black.
That's not better.
It sounds good, but I said, okay.
It sounds horrible.
If you want to go down that road, what about St. Joseph? He didn't turn black.
No.
What about these other saints that you got there? St. Agatha didn't turn black. So what's that all about? And he could not explain it.
Yeah.
And later on, years later, I'm talking to somebody else that's, a theologian, and they were saying that the Catholic Church oftentimes uses the Black Madonna as a dumping ground for all the things about its dogma that it does not want to explain.
Of course they do.
So it's like, okay, that'll hold me for now.
Well, I mean, it's horrible, but this is gonna sound weird, but that kind of tracks. It's horrifying, but it makes sense more so than, these 500 times there was a bad candle around.
No,
right?
I was very, very fortunate.
It's worse, but not. But
as the universe works, I was very fortunate to make the acquaintance of a woman who actually wrote in the catalog. Her name is Michaela Mormon, and she is a scholar, and she did her graduate thesis on the Black Madonna.
Excellent.
And she has torn it apart in ways that I hadn't even thought of before. And I was so happy and so lucky, actually, to have run into her. And her essay in the catalog is really quite excellent. You'll get a feeling for it.
I can't wait. There's a copy in my bag. I'll be reading it later, but I'm really looking forward to that. And that's kind of what I meant. You did this despite all the pushback, and then it turned out there's a community of other people who have noticed this themselves and are doing it in their own.
So when
way.
I'm in Brazil and you go into churches in Brazil, oftentimes you run into the Black Madonna. There, it was a calculated practice because what they wanted to do was make sure that the Madonna looked like everybody else in the neighborhood, And what it reminded me of was when I was a child in China and we'd see pictures of the Madonna and she'd have slant eyes, okay? And it was to make sure that everybody realized that here's a Madonna that looks like them, that they can relate to, that's from their culture.
Which was a strategy that was part and parcel of erasing the pre-existing indigenous
parts of South America, they've colored the Madonna. Parts of Africa, they've colored the Madonna.
That's why a lot of holidays kind of suddenly fall around, why in the world would a Catholic Saints' Day happen to fall on the solstice? So I don't know. Well, they were already planning. Yeah. So that kind of appropriation-based erasure was a very common strategy, obviously, throughout colonialism. And it's interesting, though, because to me that's consciousness of guilt. They knew what they were doing, and do you know what I mean? The narrative is sort of is told from the European point of view. Obviously, is not true facts stated truthfully. But it's very interesting to me that there were to know that there were people on the ground in that moment, that it wasn't only just about sort of appropriating this or that, but that they were willing to completely change the core archetypal visual dogma of their own religion under whose banner they were flying as the communication strategy once they got. That to me, something I'm going to have to, that just has I'm caught on that now, because the specificity of that so many centuries ago is really dark. Like,
So
yeah, okay. So
when
you're
you-
discovering all this, but you're already painting them.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you abandon your religious belief, let's say, it creates a vacuum. And so I was searching for something to fill that vacuum. And I was looking at all kinds of other religions. Not that I had gotten that deep into practicing them, but one of the
Well, there's
things
all the Yoruba paintings, the paintings you made in, with the Egwe, am I saying that right?
Iguns.
Igun.
Iguns, that goes back to Brazil.
That's
a-
Brazil,
that's a
but I'm
whole
just
other-
saying like all this stuff
I did
is
not
all.
get into candomblé.
No, but you, no, I don't know, but you didn't, but you spend enough time like paying attention to it that a whole series of really meaningful, beautiful work came
And
out of
I
it.
have a healthy respect for other
Yeah.
religions.
Yeah.
You know, I believe that everybody finds their path on their own. What happened with me was I got into meditation. And the meditation kind of filled that void. And I realized all the possibilities that existed through that. When I was looking at some of these classical pictures of paintings of the Madonna and stuff like that, one of the things that always intrigued me was what was going on in the background. Because there's always be little stuff going on in the background, okay? Little stuff that's kind of enigmatic, you can't quite interpret what it's all about, but it's there. And you know it's there for a reason, and the artist had an intent for putting it there.
Yeah.
So I decided to flip the script. I'm sitting up there doing these black Madonnas, but in the background, I put images of white supremacists that are being persecuted, okay, in many of the same ways that African Americans were over the course of years. And so it's kind of this revenge fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, in many
Yeah.
ways. But the thing that you have to understand is that you're contrasting this image of mother and child, this unconditional love, with these other things that are in the background, okay? And usually, you know, your existence is somewhere in the middle of all of that, okay? Because we all have those good and bad sides of ourselves.
That's so interesting to think of it as the sort of self and shadow self moving around in the composition, because obviously the revenge fantasy aspect, which is pretty satisfying emotionally, I mean, obviously, and also frequently kind of funny, which is like a little unexpected reprieve. But also the hypocrisy of how much death and violence was perpetrated in the name of the church this whole time, and religion generally. So that's also there. But to be able to look at them and now think of them as all contained within one sense of oneself, and to be figuring it out, that is fascinating.
So these tantos that you see that exist in all of these, besides being
These shapes.
Yeah, besides being a mechanism for tying all of them together, actually do represent a visualization of my mantra, okay? So,
Oh, wow, oh my God.
you know,
Okay.
in the mantra, they explain to you that you start off repeating the mantra, and then a thought will come into your head. So what you see in terms of the circles represent the thought about that particular person and their history and stuff like that. And then you slowly go back into the mantra. And each time you do that, you go into deeper and deeper levels of consciousness. And so, you know, to a large degree, that consciousness that you achieve as a result of that meditative practice informs how you approach these subjects.
And where in the choice of subject does that happen? Like, do you think, okay, this is the figure or the episode from history or the thing ripped from today's headlines that I want to make my next work or a work about, and then sort of meditate on it and then go back and forth? Or is it more holistic? Like you meditate and see what comes and then that's the work you do. You don't have to fully pull the whole thing apart, but I'm just curious like how it, you know, what that conversation's like in your studio with yourself.
Well, a lot of times, you know, I'm fascinated with these little-known figures from the African diaspora.
Yeah.
You know, people that you don't. I mean, everybody's heard about Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and stuff like that. And we can do images of that forever. But some of these people, in their own way, were very heroic, and their ability to overcome their situation was something that I felt could serve as an example for everyone.
I agree, and I think that's an important point is that, you know, as much as there is and I love that you called them revenge fantasies, I don't know why that makes me so happy, but that, you know, they're not entire fantasies. I mean, in other words, you know, when you go to put the composition together, that may be a place of invention, but it's if it's fiction, it's historical fiction. And the figures themselves are not fictional at all. I mean,
well, the figures in the Halo series, no.
Right, those are
they all existed.
They all existed,
Yeah.
and so, you know, they're not a sort of type of thing that might have happened. They're not composites of the kinds of stories. It's a figure with a life that you've researched and documented. And so to your point of the classics illustrated, it's like, you're gonna see the image, you've seen the image, it's in your brain. But if you would also like to learn, it's written down, it's right here. That's who the person is, that's what the state is, that's what this word means. And so, how are they, okay. I would imagine it's a field of research that the more you dive in, the more you realize there is still to find, ever expanding. How do you make choices?
I tell people constantly that the research is ongoing. And what happens is it kind of creates this chain of reference. Like for instance, if you'll notice, there are probably a half a dozen figures in the Halo series that are from Haiti. You know, and Haiti's always been a fascinating situation because it's one of the places in the Western Hemisphere that I feel that has been punished for the successful slave revolution and continues to be punished to this day. Every other island in the Caribbean has some sort of tourist situation going on.
And now we're coming after even the people who fled.
Now we're coming about the
that
people
we
that
supposedly
came here.
welcomed.
Exactly, you know.
Right, I mean, that's what I meant when we were talking a little bit earlier. I was like, so Mark, how does it feel to be making paintings this whole time and it's still in the headlines today, right? I mean, so that's a whole other subject of like, how's it going? But just to say like, well spotted vis-a-vis Haiti, because if anyone has any doubt that you're right about the punishment dynamic that we still enact toward them, turn the news on.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of them are from the Caribbean, a lot from Brazil. I spent some time, I was in a residency in Brazil for a number of months.
When I met you, you were on your way to the Amazon.
Oh, that was another trip.
But I know that was a different trip, Val, I see somewhere, but nevertheless, literally the day I first met you in life,
right.
I was like, so what are you know, whatever, we were working on some kind of cola thing. And I was like, oh, well, let me get something in a couple weeks. And you're like, in a couple weeks, I'm gonna be canoeing down the Amazon, actually. So maybe when I get back from that. So that was my first impression of you, is you're on your way to like Fitzcarraldo, you know, yeah. It was impressive, but just to say like, yes, you've been there a lot.
We swam with the piranha.
So you're not scared of anything.
No.
That's right. But, you know, so this is also like, I think that's an important thing is you also have made a point, and this is something we've talked about before. A lot of artists go on residencies. Residencies are great. We love residencies. But you keep picking these places where not only has horrific shit happened in the past, but then like while you're there, there'll be a riot. Like you were in Charlotte?
I was in Charlotte.
You were in Charlottesville.
I called my mother up and I said, yeah, they're rioting down the street. She said, well, make sure you don't put your butt in the middle of all of that. And the next night, they were on my doorstep.
He's like, oh, I have this balcony. It's so nice in the evenings. What? Like, okay, right. So that's what I mean. So, you know, this is, you know, research is research, but we're not only talking about like you at the library. Like you get on planes, you put yourself physically in the place, in the mix when you're doing this research. You go to the place. And how, I mean, aside from, in some ways the answer is obvious. How important does that vary? But I guess I would ask, like, in what ways it's important to you to not only acquire the information, but to experience the location to as great a degree as you can while you're working on them.
You know, it's really interesting because one of the pieces over there, Maria de Oliveira, I was on this island where all this took place and didn't find out about it until I got back here.
Wow. Right, you know, because this
and the
is
thing
all
about
over
it
the
was,
world.
on a lot of levels, she existed almost at the point of legend. there hadn't been a lot of empirical evidence to suggest that she even existed. But the story had been passed down and passed down and passed down. 3 weeks before this show opened,
this show that we're in right now.
This show that we're in now, I got a correspondence from a Brazilianist who said that one of her colleagues had gone to Lisbon and gone through their archives and actually found records of her. Okay. And the story, I mean, I love the story.
Like, have a great opening, Mark. Like, it's like a little card to you from her. Like, I know you've been looking for me. I want you to have a great show. I mean, that's incredible. Wow.
So the story behind her, which I,
please
one
tell
of my
it,
favorite
because
stories.
we can't tell everyone that, and I do want you to tell some. So please, she's a great one.
Like, I can't keep track of those things.
Please, yeah.
But she was a revolutionary in Itaparica, across the bay from Salvador.
Okay.
And the Portuguese were getting ready to set up shop in Salvador, and they floated in with like an armada of something like 40 boats or something like that. She gets together with her girls, and she says, we can take care of this.
I love that it's girls.
And they seduce the men off the boats, seduce the guards off the boats, middle of the night, got them drunk, got their clothes off.
So easy.
And then started beating them with this bush called cadansal, which is like poison ivy, but it's really, it's a lot stronger. And if it breaks the skin, you will get an infection, and the infection can kill you. Okay. And so while these guys are writhing in agony, it gave enough time for the resistance to swim out and burn down all their boats.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Icon. That's icon shit. I mean, that's incredible. I'm so sorry to whoever thinks it's weird. I love that so much, but I do. So no, I mean, that story, okay. And here's just like another, you said this a little while ago, right? Like, these stories are one kind of story, but they're actually stories that belong to all humanity. Mm-hmm. Like, do you need proof that we've been through something like this before, that our ancestors have figured out, have figured out ways to push back, like that there are heroes in the past that we can look to, that, the degree to which legends are so often based on real people, that's literally the point, is that they are real people like you, which means you are not powerless either. Not that anyone is suggesting like literally doing that per se, but your version of that, something. Put yourself a little bit at risk, get your girls together, don't just be afraid and let it happen. And that is a lesson that I think, I don't know, might have some resonance for today.
So the other part of this, that I'd like to explain too, is that what I consider these contemporary icons on a lot of levels. Okay?
Well, that's the thing. There's not just Madonnas. Like, anyone who knows art history or the church knows there's hundreds of these saints, and they all get that same treatment.
But remember what icons were used for back in the day. An icon was usually carried in front of the army, and it was a not so subtle way of telling your opposition, God is on our side. And my belief was that we're confronted with a lot of challenges these days, and we need a whole new set of icons for a whole new set of problems.
And I personally am a little over being told by people who want to take my rights away that it's because God said.
Yeah.
For example, that's just me, we're not here to, but like, right. I mean, in other words, there's a little bit of resonance for our current situation and women in that situation. So, and not just in America and not just in the West. Mm-hmm. So, yes. And that's sort of like another version of the same question. I would love to hear, everyone kind of loves her, right? The red bodycon dress with the pipe and the obvious, like, couldn't care less queen energy. I mean, there's a reason people are drawn to that one. But also, that's one of the rare ones without events going on in the background.
True.
Right? And so, there are, like I was saying before, like, there are choices that get made along the way. And like this one, for example, the landscape, to my mind, sort of references more of that like generic background, like behind the Mona Lisa, it's rocks and waterfalls, and there's kind of like a standard version of that they all kind of did, or, you know, that was like a thing. You fill it in, you solve your color problems, but there's nothing really going on back there. Whereas in much of the work that you sourced from, there are things going on back there. You talked about that. So when you go to illustrate, so you've got the person, and you kind of know what that needs to be, a kind of version of that same portrait. Like, you know, Saint Sebastian is always, you can tell which one it is because of the arrows. There's one, you know, like they perform their martyrdom in their physical description, in their saint images, right? So that part, you solve that. They have a story, you figure out how to illustrate it in their figure. But now it's time to put things in the background. And that is where some of the more impactful ones are definitely contemporary events going on in the background, or let's just say not necessarily contemporaneous with the figure. You reach across different periods of history. So when you go to make those decisions, is that, like, how do you sort of decide what is going to be the action behind them?
I run a lot of tapes in my head about, you know, what would happen if I tweaked it just this much, or put some element of humor into it, because I know humor sometimes can draw the viewer in and really make the message a lot more impactful.
They'll spend longer with it too.
As you're talking,
yeah.
I'm looking over your shoulder at Carlotta of Cuba, okay, which is a woman from the 1600s who's carrying an AK-47.
For example.
Where's the sense of that, you know?
Right.
She was a revolutionary in Cuba. In the 1970s, Cuba sent 5,000 troops to Angola in an operation called Operation Carlotta.
I did not
and
know
it was
that.
to help to liberate Angola from the Portuguese.
Wow.
And so that's why I decided to characterize her with a modern weapon. And the castle that's in the back is in Matanzas in Cuba, and that castle actually exists. So there are things like that. There's a piece over in this room, I think, of Stephen Bishop, and he was instrumental in mapping the Mammoth Caves in Kentucky. Okay, and nobody's ever been able to map the entire cave system in Mammoth. The cave system is supposed to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 438 miles of cave. It's the largest cave system in the world. And he was actually enslaved by the guy who bought the caves for $5,000. And he was responsible for the whole tour program that was set up for the caves. He did realize his freedom a few years before he died, but I chose to characterize him carrying a canteen with the bat symbol on it as the original Batman.
A kind of dark Avenger, right. By the way, as well, happens to be.
So, you know, sometimes I'll sneak certain things in that suggest a little bit about the person, or how I even feel about the person, you know. I decided to put halos around everyone's head because it goes back again to that whole idea of Catholicism. And one of the things that struck me about Catholicism was how arbitrary it was on the part of the church to designate somebody to be beatified, okay? And oftentimes
miracles.
It's like, you know, you get a support group and they say, oh, we need to make a saint out of this guy. Well, that didn't work too well in the case of Junipero Serra, right? No. When they found out that he was cutting off the hands of Native Americans.
Yeah.
So realizing that it was that way, well, what if I decided I wanted to make people saints? Realizing that everybody has both that good and that bad side, realizing that there's the positive and negative of everyone. They're just people. And at some point in their life, they did something that impacted other people in a heroic way. And I chose to make sure that their memory is not forgotten.
Yeah. No, and you know, there's a saying, there's two versions of the saying, right? In the Jewish vernacular, when someone dies, it's like, may their memory be for a blessing, but there's another one, may their memory be for a revolution. And that's the thing. And I think it's beautiful that you took the language of the elevation to sainthood, because not only does it allow you to stay within this incredibly appealing vernacular and, you know, visual lexicon, but also because the concept of the hero has been so militarized and or comic bookified in our culture that I think like there's no way that a version of this in like superhero gear, or not that you considered that, but like if you went down the hero visual language, we have shorthand for that that's very like movies and pop culture. And I think, or war, or like, you know, propaganda TV shows, whatever, like that's hero in the popular visual language of America, at least. And so I think, you know, bringing it to something with roots outside of the contemporary, you know, cultural vernacular, I think was a really great strategy, because everybody knows that this is a Catholic altarpiece, right? If you've been to a museum, you know that that's what this is. You don't have to have anything to ever do with Christianity in any form to know what the reference here is. And so right away, it's like everyone's on the same page. We know what gold leaf is. That's why Andy Warhol's Gold Marilyn was gold, because his whole point with that is we've elevated our pop culture celebrities to the status that used to be reserved for religious icons and aspirational sainthood. And so I'm going to use the one thing we know church has, which is gold leaf, right?
Do you know why these are gold?
I always thought it was because of that. Oh, there's more. I love you so much. Tell me.
It gets a little deeper.
Okay, settle in.
I mean, besides the fact that, you know, gold was what was normally used for these icons, one of the things
and
about
the richness
gold,
of the church.
And the riches of the church. One of the things that struck me was it was also the currency by which most of these people were, the business these people were transacted, the slave business. And so that was a very important and very deliberate decision that I made in terms of using that.
Oh my God, I like need to sit with that for a second. I think everybody needs to sit with that for just a second. Well, I also point out that I told you were intentional, and you're like, oh, not mean. I'm just an artist. But the thoughtfulness, the insane thoughtfulness of that, and the sort of emotional whiplash of how gorgeous and seductive it is, with like reminding you that this was the money actually, is. See, I've been friends with you for 20 years, and I literally just learned that fact about this work with everyone in this. Well, some of you might have known, Val knew. But like, wow. Okay, and so now you have completely come back off the work into my emotional space and complexified and kind of fucked up my relationship to something that I was, no, not me, but me, the viewer. Like, by the way, you're not gonna get off the hook just enjoying this. It's beautiful, but I've got something for you behind that beauty, which is such an unforgettable, powerful kind of gesture on your part, and also rebounds and makes us think about every bit of topicality inside the images in a different way as well. I mean, in other words, that's an incredibly successful material. Your material has meaning kind of moment in the work. Wow. Yay, thank you. I didn't know that. I thought I knew a lot about this work, but I didn't know that. And damn.
And going back to what I was trying to explain in terms of like the positives and negatives,
yeah.
So like, and how everybody has that, you know. I'm thinking in terms of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who a lot of people don't realize that after Toussaint was captured, Toussaint Louverture, and taken to France and ultimately died, that Dessalines took over the Haitian Revolution. And one of his first orders of business was to kill 5,000 men, women, and children that were all French. Oh. His idea is, I have to purge this island of the French. And so, on the one hand, you look at that atrocity, but on the other hand, you look at the fact that in many respects, he's considered the father of the country.
Well, right. I mean, both. I mean, that's not an either or. Like, the point is
that duality.
That duality was like I mean, you know, people know about epigenetic trauma now, and so to think that is the origin story, the idea, especially, you know, psychologically, if you deal with collective subconscious and all that stuff, to know that that is the circumstances of the birth of the modern nation explains a lot.
And even before,
no matter what you think about it, it explains a lot.
Before Dessalines, there was a guy named Francois Mackendal in Haiti. And he had lost his arm in a sugar press when he was, I think, 10 or 12. But he became an herbalist. And even though he was enslaved, people would go to him for healing. But he also knew how to make poisons.
I bet he did.
And he distributed poisons to every plantation that he could. Okay, and he's responsible for killing.
I mean, it's
somewhere in the
horrible.
neighborhood of 5,000
It's
or
horrible, but
6,000
honestly,
French troops.
you know, I mean, first of all, just start with the fact that, you know, don't gloss over the fact that we're talking about 12-year-olds running sugar presses. Like, that was, you know what I mean? Like, that's just like low down on the level of crimes against.
But let me continue with this story.
Yeah.
So he's basically, somebody tattled on him, and he was captured. Okay, and he kept saying, you know, you can't hold me. And he escaped several times and was recaptured. So at the point where he was getting ready to poison the water supply, okay, he was captured again. And this time they said, you know, we just got to burn this guy. We're tired of it. So they assembled all the slaves in the town square. I think the crowd was like 2,000 or 3,000. And they tied him to the stake to burn him. But because of the fact that they couldn't get a secure tie because he was missing an arm, when they set the fire alight, he jumped off the fire, okay? And made the statement, it's like, you can't kill me. I'm bad, okay?
I mean.
So then they cleared the square, and they tied him to the stake again. This time they set him on fire. But because nobody saw it, the legend existed.
Because they cleared the square.
Because they cleared the square. So the legend is that his spirit still roams that island, and that his spirit was actually the one that inspired Toussaint Louverture to the revolution.
I mean, that doesn't sound like a legend to me. That sounds like what happened. Do you know what I mean? Like, in other words, the spirit does still roam the island. Hello. Whether is it a ghost? I don't know. But is the spirit still roaming the island? Obviously, right? I mean, that's how, because it lives in the culture and the whispers and the, yeah. I mean, that's incredible. And that, by the way, so that's one painting. That's one painting.
I'm not going to can't go through all of these.
So,
okay.
Just to say, I mean, I'm so glad that there's starting to be books and more books, because that's what's required, right? Because the ultimate goal is education of more people of how things actually were.
I'm looking over your other shoulder now. The mariner that's there, a guy named
The one with the ships behind his.
Lope Martin.
Yeah.
Lope Martin was reputed to have actually studied navigation. He was enslaved in Morocco and taken to Spain. And when they found out that he had navigational skills, they sent him to Mexico. Because both King Philip and the Pope wanted to find a new route to get to the Indies, of course. So they sent 3 boats out. He, of course, got the shitboat of all of them. But there was an Augustine monk that was on another boat. And in the middle of the Pacific, they hit a storm and got separated.
Oh.
Lope actually made it to the Philippines. They made it too, but in a different place. After he had kind of solidified his beachhead in this one island, he went out to try to find the other ships. And they sailed around for 2 months trying to find them, and they could not. So he turns around and goes back to Mexico. And he gets back to Mexico, and like he's hailed as this hero. But the viceroy there is like, well, wait a minute, we don't know if we want this black guy to get all this credit, because we were really counting on the Augustine monk taking all the juice from this thing. The Augustine monk and his other 2 boats come in a couple months later. And then they said to Lope, they said, you need to go back because we need better charts on how to get back to the Philippines. And it said, and by the way, when you get to the Philippines, give this letter to the magistrate. Oh. And the letter was sealed.
I don't like
And somewhere in the middle of the Pacific, Lopez said, you know what?
Yeah.
I want to see what's in this letter.
Yeah, I do too.
He opened the letter up and it says, when you get there, when you see this guy, kill him.
Yeah.
And he never came back.
Yeah. Right.
And he had established so many relationships across the Pacific that he didn't have to come back.
He didn't have to come back. And he had this boat already.
Yeah, exactly.
And, thanks for the boat,
Exactly.
everyone. Yeah.
But, he's considered the Christopher Columbus of the Pacific.
For better and worse.
Yeah.
Right. Both. Right. I mean, what I love about it is the fact, how, I mean, it's easy to just sort of say, oh, history is not, binary, this or that. This happened, no, this happened. Okay, we're done here. Because as you keep saying, every actor in history is a person with two sides to themselves. So, a minute ago you had us being like, yeah, jump out of that fire. Ooh, the whole water supply? You know what I mean? And so, right? And so it's kind of like everything is a degree and nothing is just one thing. And to my mind, that's like a completely ideal place for art to be. Because as I never tire of saying, one of art's superpowers is the ability to contain paradox in itself. You can create a reality in an image that in no way, shape, or form could exist in front, not just in front of you, but like you can bend time streams, you can play with a better informed versions of race and gender, you can do whatever, economies of space mean nothing, structural architecture doesn't need to be structurally sound. I mean, you can do whatever you need to do in an image to make sure everything gets in there, even the things that contradict each other. And that they can exist simultaneously in a painting in a way that maybe they couldn't exist in the world, but certainly people even have trouble cognating paradox. And so to be able to kind of create a fixed image that contains so many different things within it simultaneously and so many layers, I think is incredible, and you're gifted an artist, but B, like that is what art, at its finest, I think is is what you're doing with it. And so that's why I'm obsessed with you.
But it's really interesting because, I mean, in my academic life, when I was teaching, one of the things that struck me was that concept becomes much more important now than your ability to communicate things literally.
Or at all, or whatever.
And so on a lot of levels, my work is criticized as being too didactic. But at the same time,
ironically, it does so with extensive
and I have
reading
actually
materials.
embraced that whole idea.
No, I'm teasing. You're absolutely right. And I think, there's a reason that, that the Renaissance was like successful messaging, right? And it's that skill set is kind of, your version of that. And I think, it's kind of annoying that they were right because of all of the bullshit. But here we are. I mean, it's, at least in the Western tradition, it's sort of unmatched for powers of communication. So, and also culpability in the specifics of the narratives you're picking. And so I think that's there's like such a beautiful shape to that. Okay. In a couple minutes, we're gonna open it up. So I want to make sure that we at least spare a thought for the auras situation, the non-figurative work of which there's a beautiful sort of proto-masterpiece happening on the back wall, and that we've discussed, although this is all very much ongoing due to the tragic nature of its being endless, is that this is also happening for you in the studio now, these non-figurative works.
I was scared you were going to ask me about that.
Well, it's right on the thing. But yes, I am going to ask you about that. But part of the reason but you already said something that I feel like maybe might be what I think a little bit, which is the importance to you of your meditation practice. And I've told you before, and I don't know if I'm right or not, and it's fine if I'm not, I don't mind if you say, no, that's wrong in front of these people. But what I first thought when I saw that was a self-care method of tuning out all of this that you've been immersed in your whole life, career, but with this, intensity since these series started, of tuning out the relentlessness of our headlines and current political monstrosities, And like any version of self-care, sitting quietly with yourself, couldn't have an image in it, because once you're engaged in telling the stories have this dark momentum of their own, and fealty to that imagery that you need to, retain, because you're telling something true. And that this is, something that exists like much abstraction does in a more pure energy place. It's related to this part of these paintings instead of the narratives. And it seemed like an oasis kind of place. And like, I don't blame you, because this is what you sit with all day. So that's what I thought. And I said it to you before, and you looked at me like, oh, I don't know if that's true or not. So anyway, that's what I thought. But like, what really is it?
It was an experiment. Plain and simple. And your explanation of it actually makes more sense than anything I came up with.
My work here is done. Thank you for coming.
I had given some thought to, maybe continuing in this vein, but somebody pulled my coattail and said, it's kind of derivative of somebody else. And the minute they said that, it was like the kiss of death. It's like, I can't do any more of this. But I don't know. I may do another, but.
Well, because you've done this before, like there are sets of your work, but like where it's image based, but then there are also pieces in that series that take a motif or a pattern and make a sort of all over abstraction of them, thinking of the cotton plants things.
It's my own schizophrenia.
But you've been doing that before. Like you've been doing very narrative, figurative work with an abstract pattern based corollary over the years. So it's not completely out of nowhere, but you're kind of done now because somebody said the thing and you're like, fuck it, I'm done with it.
I'm searching. I was explaining where I was after finishing this body of work to somebody, and it was almost like postpartum separation. It's like, I have to decompress from this. Although, just since I've finished this, I've come across some news stories.
Of course you have. That's what I mean. Like the sad, it's bittersweet that it's an endless source of content for you if you want it.
So, I may do a few more, or
you're going to do a few more,
or something.
You'll be doing more.
Thank you.
I'm just letting you know. Don't even pretend. Like, what do you think? Oh no, I'm done now. No, they're important. They're beautiful. People love them. Our society cries out for it. You're not done. I'm so sorry to tell you. It's bigger than you. We need it.
That's why she's such a good friend.
Oh, I love you, Bill. Bill's the best. And Bill Turner, everyone, Spirit Thought, because thanks to Bill Turner, we get to see this work even more often due to exhibiting it at his gallery in Bergamot Station from time to time. So thank you for that, Bill. Well spotted. Yeah.
A little bit to the gold leaf from the experience of seeing people with that first exhibition with Black Madonnas. One of the things I loved was how you see this from a distance. It feels very traditional, very historical, and then as people got closer, they go, "What the hell?" This is a Black Madonna, a Black baby Jesus. And I just got to share, when I sat in Mark's studio when I first saw these pieces, I couldn't take my eyes off them, but it was about 30 minutes, because we were talking as I'm kind of looking out of my eye, before I saw what was going on in the background. And then I went, oh my God, this is fantastic. It's a complete role reversal. These white supremacists getting their asses kicked in very interesting, sometimes playful, sometimes a little macabre ways, but there was this whole sense of a not too gruesome, but playful way to say, hey, what if you kind of did a little bit of a role reversal and a shift? And so when we did that first show, it was pre-vaccine, still COVID, and we had to kind of extend the opening for like 8 hours. And people kind of came in, here and there, but I've never had a show where people came and stayed for 45 minutes to an hour. Especially exciting were all the young kids, especially Black, who would take pictures of themselves with these pieces. And it was kind of like this insidious way of inserting this back into the history that we all should know about, and haven't. And so that's why you can't stop doing this, because I am having as much fun as you are, and as all of us are, in learning these stories that in some ways are gruesome, but in all ways inspiring, that the resistance and the human spirit to not be suppressed, to find very ingenious, creative ways to resist and overcome the oppression that they endured. It's amazing. And so, thank you.
That's beautiful, Bill. Thank you.
Thank
you. Yeah, and don't forget, I mean, that time was also the height of BLM, and so we were having conversations about justice and representation and resistance, and it was for a brief moment, it was widely received. Those pleas for equality and just were actually apparently seemed to be being listened to at that moment, into which, and again, this work had been being made for years before that show came about. So it wasn't like since May that entire show got painted, right? That was the work that was already happening, exactly. And so that kind of thing, I think, just continues to astound.
One other thing, the one fictional piece that is in the show that's not historically related in terms of a real person is Calafia here, who, and I was on the California Arts Council for 8 years, charged with, as a state agency, promoting the arts and culture of our state. Never knew that our state was named after that fictional figure. Black Amazonian woman that was part of a Spanish adventure story written in the 1500s that inspired the conquistadors as they were going west. They were told that there was this island of California where there were these black Amazonian women and jewels and riches and so on. So every time they went, they inspired to stop. They would go, maybe over the next rise we get to that California. And when they finally got to the West Coast and they saw the peninsula of California, they thought, oh, that's that island. And that's how our state got its name.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I would guess there was probably a woman at some point, somewhere. You know what I'm saying? Like, this stuff doesn't come fully out of the air. So like something happened, some kind of something, and then it grew into a legend, definitely, right? But I don't know I just think the word fictional might be like a little strong. Apocryphal might be better, because there's
It was based on
yeah.
a story that was around the time of Cervantes that they all read, and it was a Spanish writer who wrote it. So
I love that. See, it was a Spanish writer who wrote it. Well, I promise you, Mr. Spanish writer met a woman one time. Is all I'm saying. And she made an impression on him. And here we are. So that's all I'm saying. But yes, technically not unlike her, who you just found out was real. Yes, Mika?
No, can we open?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's time.
Audience, if you have any questions? If you wanna
Did we cover? Oh, you? Yes. Oh, okay.
Should I stand up?
Okay. And you're next.
So if you have not yet seen Mark's subway mosaic in your
Oh, yeah. Jill, thank you. Oh, my God. Yes. Yes. Well spotted.
and they are amazing.
It's my local subway station. I see it all the time. I totally forgot. Thank you. It's so true. And it's kind of a more abstracted pattern, but it does, you're absolutely right, but it does kind of the same thing. It uncovers an important, unknown, true history.
It just makes you feel so good when you go through there.
Yeah.
Okay, now I actually do have a question. And I asked you this before, but I forgot the answer. So all the skin tones in these paintings are completely black with maybe blue highlights. There's a brown, a red, a yellow. And I know that was purposeful. So
Very intentional.
Artists ask the best questions. Yes.
I used to be the president of the California African American Genealogical Society. And in doing research about my family and other people's families, one of the things that you notice in the census records was this B for black everywhere. Didn't matter how light you were, what color you were, what shade of brown you were black. And so the world saw us that way. And to some degree, you know, it's arguable in terms of how we see ourselves at this point. Some people say African American, they feel that's more politically correct. Some people say black. I tend to kind of gravitate towards black because it's all inclusive. And it's a much larger group to identify with, you know. Although, you know, I will use the word African American interchangeably because that also is valid. But it's just one of those things that I find important.
Well, it's interesting because, like, for example, it's different. What you do is different, but, like, for example, what Amy Sherrill does, where she has this skin tone that is actually a grayscale skin tone, and that's everyone in her images. And she has her own reasons, but it's adjacent to what you're saying, like this idea that, like, it's this considered a monolith that couldn't be less monolithic. Let me just not have to have that conversation in every single painting. And so she made this choice and then does all the rest of what she does. And so I know this isn't the same as that, but it's a great question because it does kind of, there's a through line then.
There is a tendency to do a lot of comparisons, you know, so people will look at the work and they say, oh, you're black like Kerry James Marshall's black, or you're black like, you know, Michael Ray Charles is black, or stuff like that. I don't really get involved in that conversation.
But you were looking at also to the Black Madonnas, and this was much more likely to be that choice, right?
And my black is actually, it's blacker than black.
Blacker than black, y'all. See?
I've got purple in the black there.
I don't know what that means, but it sounds amazing. I've got purple black. Yes.
So you may have already said you don't know out that final piece of your conversation, but you know, throughout your career, you've had these concurrent series, and a chunk of them deal more in abstraction, and others in sort of more realistic, you know, figuration. But you've been talking for, I don't know, a year or two, that this series was playing itself out. You said at the end of the day, you've been encouraged to think that, yeah, but let it play itself out. But I'm interested, you said that you don't think it's this because of the comment that was made to you, but I'm interested in your thoughts about whether it's after this or it begins alongside it, where you think you might land in, say, a next or concurrent series.
That's a good question, Bert. These are really safe, and they're formulaic on a lot of levels. You know, there are certain parts of it that are going to exist in all of them. And the other thing about that is the size of these is very important too. You know, I intentionally want something that's small like that. Whether or not it goes in the direction of, say, auras, I'm not quite clear on yet. And I guess some of it would depend on the complexity of the stories. You know, is it possible that maybe in future iterations of this that I put more in the background, or break the background up a little bit, or make them just a little bit larger, you know, maybe the size of the Black Madonnas. It's at a turning point on a lot of levels. I'm not sure exactly where it's going to go. And I've been at this place before, but I was a lot younger then and a lot more resilient and could probably turn on a dime a little faster. I don't see myself doing that right now. You know, I'm going to take a little bit of time and figure out exactly where this goes next.
And the world is changing so fast too. And even though this is about history and therefore, you know, the past, it obviously isn't in a lot of important ways as well. It's very much about the present and even, you know, feeding into a future that would be improved by this knowledge, for example, being more widely held. So I don't want, not like specifics, but like just this idea of being aware that the world is so volatile right now and there's all of these, we're at such a multiple fork crossroads, that maybe it is just like I don't know how I feel yet either. I'm gonna have to see what happens before I figure out exactly how I feel, because right now I'm living in hope, and in a few weeks we'll find out if I mean, like, just whatever you think, big changes are coming right fucking now, okay? And like, that requires our attention. And so the world, if you started painting the world right now, the world's gonna be different in 7 weeks from now than it is right now.
Yeah.
So almost kind of, yeah, what is the point of making a decision? Because we have a short-term assignment.
Right.
And then on the other side of that, we can like look around and see how it's going. You know what I mean? Like, in terms of engaging with these subject matters, these are like hot plate. Like, this is still cooking. This is on the stove currently. So you deserve, I mean, you can have a couple weeks if you want to just sit with it for a minute. Like, it's fine. It's no big deal. You have my permission. It's totally cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're in this part of limbo time, culturally, globally, and comes November in Scorpio season, as we have all of these new icons rising, and these new visionaries coming forward all over the world. We'll all see.
Yeah. So you're not done. You just take a little minute. It's fine. Yes.
We've talked about this before. We're never done. You're an artist. You make something else and it will be just as wonderful because you're a wonderful artist. And as much as sometimes you feel it or the public wants you to continue making the art they expect from you, make whatever you love.
He's sitting right there.
I know.
I totally support that. I never ever try to tell the artists which way to go. I love the fact that they always surprise me. Absolutely.
I think it's going to be wonderful. You're just such a wonderful
And this artist, this Ada, she paints clouds. And I make a feeble attempt at trying to paint clouds in a lot of my pieces. She has mastered it on so many levels. So I really take my lead from some of the things that she's done.
And we both change our mind a lot.
We don't.
It's like having one.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we need to do the housekeeping.
Okay.
Housekeeping.
Yeah, so it's been really great, and we can sit here forever and talk about this, but we have to stop somewhere. But before I stop, I want to ask you to say something, because we've been collaborating before, but this one was, I don't want to say intense, but it was quite a work, and I am very happy and glad that he's willing to work with me and work with our gallery. So this is what it is. So
Let's turn everybody.
This installation of this exhibition is brilliant. I mean, there's such a balance and flow to it, and challenging, because the space and the different sizes of pieces is magical, and it just has this wonderful sense of flow to it. So congratulations to you. We initially talked about doing this exhibition about a year ago.
No, 2 years.
2 years ago. And thank God we waited.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you guys, thank you so much. That was a wonderful talk. And yeah, it was. I would just say very briefly, because you already heard a lot of my comments, but we've known each other, Mark and I, for maybe 30 years, for a long time. And it wasn't until relatively recently that I bumped into Mark at the California African American Museum giving a tour. And I said, I knew him as working for Cultural Affairs and Watts Tower director, and so we met, we crossed paths a lot. I said, what are you doing here at camp? And he said, I'll give you a tour of my show. And I go, wait a second, you're an artist too? That's my main gig. I do the other stuff for the rent. So I was, from that moment, kind of really impressed. I saw this historical survey of Mark's work pre this.
It was incredible.
And did not immediately think, oh, I've got to show this work, because a lot of it was borrowed back and so on. It was just I was really just like, it opened up this new sense of him to me. And then when I was in his studio, having known each other for so long, I saw these pieces and I kind of felt like when you meet someone you really want to be involved with, whether it's romantically or something, I got nervous. I'm sure these are spoken for, so I don't want to embarrass myself, but I waited for the right moment. I said, listen, I know you probably have plans for these and so on, but if there was ever a chance to show these pieces, I would love to. And he said, Bill, I would love to. And I just went, thank God. So that's how I feel about Mark and these pieces. It's just been a thrill to work with him. And I will never tell him which way to go because I love being surprised. There is genius in all the artists I work with. And one of the things that actually inspires me is the chances every artist takes when they do go in a new direction. You know, that's what's exciting. So I applaud that. Thank you.
We have a beautiful catalog, and I want to thank you to Personally Research Office. They gave me a grant. And then we had some other donors, so we did it. And I think every time we kind of get together and better, and I'm so proud of it. And then we have some snacks outside and drinks outside, so you can hang out a little bit. And I was asking my student, can we stay a little bit longer so people can see the work, because a lot of you haven't seen the whole exhibition, right? But the exhibition is going to go on until October 22nd, so you have more time to come visit. And thank you again, and thank you for being here. It's great.
Yeah, the show I had here, it's going to be in the National Library.